I really wanted to start talking about fashion as it relates to geopolitics and as it relates to real economic theory or political theory, because I see how all of those things were interconnected. But I'd raise my hand in class and be like, do we think that Prada's runway actually could be like part of a hegemonic indicator? And my professor would be like, Gramsci was not talking about Prada, just to let you know. But I think Mitra Prada is thinking about Gramsci.
Welcome back to The Materialist. I'm Mark Bridge, the founder and CEO of At Present, Matchmaker to Extraordinary Jewelry, and I am your host. On the pod today, I'm joined by one of the most original voices in the cultural conversation, Tariro Makoni, a strategist, writer, and self-described Virgo with a discerning eye. Tariro explores the intersection of fashion, geopolitics, consumer behavior, and emotional intelligence with wit, rigor, and irreverence. She's the creator of the trademarked Substack, a must-read that somehow blends macroeconomics, Prada silhouettes, and microplastic paranoia into one addictive scroll. In our conversation, we talked about the hidden emotional truths behind materialism, the hedonism of our current moment, the rise of cigarettes, and the fall of discernment. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so excited for you to meet Tariro. Welcome to The Materialist.
Hi, my name is Tariro. I am here because I'm excited to talk about very interesting entrenched topics related to consumption and material goods.
Entrenched topics? Tell me what entrenched means.
Oh my gosh, I think deep and hidden beneath the surface. So like things that might appear simple but are actually a lot more complex than people give credit for.
You have such an interesting background and such an interesting confluence of worlds. That's something that you wrote that really struck me. I'm going to paraphrase here, and I can read the direct quote, but I think that the gist of it is, I feel a duality in my life. I feel like there are multiple things that I am drawn to, and one of them seemed acceptable and one of them didn't. I have an academic and an intellectual world. I have a strategy brain, and the sort of things that are considered professionally acceptable. And then I loved style and fashion and shopping, and I thought those things had meaning, but I was skeptical about how that was going to be received. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. Oh, sorry, did you have a question or do you want...
No, I think that I just very much resonated with that idea that questions of materialism are the hidden agenda in the corner of we're all captivated and we all have opinions about these things, but you don't talk about it. And I think one of the premises of this podcast, and it uses the materialist as a provocation, we all have opinions about these things.
Yeah.
Sometimes people's opinions are, I can't believe the amount of time or money or energy that you are wasting on these things. And other people are like, oh my God, more, bigger, faster, shinier. It's just an interesting, fundamental thing that people are uncomfortable sometimes talking about. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I'm going to answer your question probably with a series of questions or thoughts, because I think that's the reason why I do what I do and why I started creating what I create, is because to me, like, these worlds that seem so disparate, so you think about talking about the economy or climate change, public health crises, etc., are like factual, and that's great, and like people should be talking about those things, and they're well covered by BBC and CNN and WSJ, New York Times, etc. And then you have fashion and consumption and things that make people feel happy, which kind of get brushed over to the side and is, oh, how frivolous, how like cheeky of you to want to talk about the row. But then, like, economically, if you actually want to have a very honest conversation about personal consumption and what those expenditures mean, PCE is like a major contributor to GDP. This is by discretionary spending. I'm talking about the things that are quote unquote non-essential. So not your mortgage or your rent or food and water, but again, the row sweater or your travel expenses or going to the movies or eating out at a restaurant, things that you can technically live without, but are essential to dopamine and serotonin and I think the functioning of society.
Self-actualization and our ability to
be happy. And so I think what's fascinating there is that there is no, like, truthfully, there isn't really an economy to talk about if you're not willing to talk about discretionary spending. So why? And I also want to layer that women control, 85% of consumer spending. And so, like, when you really go back to the numbers and go back to what comprises what is, and then you also think about the, like, underlying systems that govern these things. So we're talking about employment, we're talking about service working in terms of the restaurant industry, we're also talking about climate when you think about things like fashion and sustainability. And all of these like disparate threads are also just so connected, but like they're literally split in half and then siloed in one side and then siloed in another. And I think that does no one any good. It's so harmful because what it does is it teaches us that the iceberg, the stuff that you see above the water is all okay, but the stuff below the water isn't, but everyone's doing the isn't. And so if we could talk about them together, wouldn't that be such a much more richer conversation, more fulfilling conversation, and also I think a more honest one. So I don't know, I don't think I answered anything, but I gave you my thesis.
I like the thesis, and I'd like to understand more about where does the thesis come from. This is in some ways an intellectual thesis, but it seems like it's the product of your life experience. So maybe start there, and where did you come from and where did these ideas coalesce?
Yeah, I was born in Zimbabwe, raised in the US. I have family scattered around the world. And I remember being 5 and being on a trip. Actually, I should have been in kindergarten. I don't know why I was pulled out of school for 2 weeks, but I went on a trip and we stopped in London, then we went to Nairobi, Kenya, and then we went to Zimbabwe and then back to the US. And I remember on this trip just thinking like, how interesting that like some women have sweaters over their shoulders, others in Nairobi are wearing these beautiful long cotton skirts at markets, and then in Zimbabwe there's like this more like I would say like traditional type of ensemble that's being worn, and all of the materials are different. And I was also a deeply precocious child. Like I hated children's programming. I wanted to watch BBC with my grandfather, and my lens was always, because I moved to the US when I was like 3 and was subsequently bullied at my Quaker school for having an English accent. There was a lot going on for me where I was like, you know what, maybe it's like cool to like isolate and not be a part of the system, quote unquote, even though I desperately wanted to be. So then it became this like thing where I was bifurcating my consumption, where I was not wanting to talk about BBC at school, but then like also wanted to be at the adults table and was like affronted when I was put at the kids table. But then on the other side, understood that everyone was talking about Bratz and Barbies, and I was like, Elwoods is also so cool. So like I want to understand that. And so then became this braided kind of thing, but also because I think my experience was so singular, at least in terms of my upbringing and who was around me, I didn't necessarily have other people to like ping pong with and be like, okay, are you seeing this? When you went there, did you feel that? And so I think it became my own type of ecosystem and my own lens. Like I was always so inspired specifically by women and what they would choose to wear and how they would interact, because my mom and my aunts are so dynamic and fascinating and brilliant and cool. And I would always be like, okay, what are other people doing? And yeah, I think that's the like origin story. And then as I've gotten older, I think it's just scaled in terms of perspective. Like I studied a blend of sociology and economics and international studies in college, and then my career has been in tech and strategy. And then I realized that I really wanted to start talking about fashion as it relates to geopolitics and as it relates to real economic theory or political theory, because I see how all of those things were interconnected. But I'd raise my hand in class and be like, hey, do we think that Prada's runway actually could be like part of a hegemonic indicator? And my professor would be like, shh. Put your hand down. That certainly wasn't Gramsci was not talking about Prada, just to let you know. And although I will say as an adult, because I didn't realize this, hard to get in prison. I would say, but I think Mitra Prada is thinking about Gramsci. So I think that is cool how those things, later on I found that through line. But yeah, so anyways, I started creating content based off of this kind of like innate desire, but also going back to, I think, what we've dubbed as the frivolity. Like, I also have always felt, because I've had this super broad lens, I really am discerning for myself on what I know is good. And I feel like that is so lost these days, based off of this commodification of taste and this idea of like, how do we consume and how do I push consumption, or how do I quote unquote influence? And for me, it's never been about wanting to influence another person. It's simply about, I am a Virgo and I spend a lot of time looking up what's good, and I'm sure other people are, and I just want to tell you from my lens what is and what isn't. And so I was like talking about things like the Gustav Westman plate and cup that no one was talking about yet, and it was going viral, and I was calling it Gen Z China, and people are like, oh my gosh, yes, that makes sense. And I was like, I found my people. So anyways, it's always been this blend, but I think it's evolved and matured with age and with additional academic and life experience, which is good.
And what are the reference points? We talked about finding Vogue at 6. We talked about Gramsci. What are the other kind of inputs that you found along the way that you said, wow, this is powerful?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but I really wanted to be an investment banker growing up. And so much so, one of my uncles is in finance, and actually a couple of my uncles are in finance, but this uncle specifically is so nice. And so I was like, oh, I can ask him anything. So I'd call him. It would be like summer break. So to me, I would think no one's working. And I'd call him at 11 a.m. and I'd be like, hey, do you mind explaining the Dow to me? And he'd be like, I'm in client meetings. Like, you cannot call me. And so anyways, my 12th birthday came up and he got me like a physical Wall Street Journal subscription that came to the house, and that was life-changing, because I think that having this like tangible, I had no idea what those words meant. Like, I was reading and I was like, this could be another language, and that's cool. And also, I don't think I was like that fluent in the concept of Google, clearly, if I'm calling someone to ask what the Dow is. And so I was like 12, just skimming words and trying to figure out what markets looked like and what was happening in the world. And then,
but there was something that captured you. These words that I don't understand are important and interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
I think for me, it's always been about governing systems and frameworks. And I think I've always really cared about the scope of the world, which sounds a little cheesy, but it's true. And I think actually, if I'm going to like really contextualize that, having grown up, going to Zimbabwe and spending a lot of time there, etc., I think that you see different types of lived experiences. People walking miles to get water in the same place that you also see people driving a Rolls Royce. And then you fly back and you see a completely different type of economic polarity, but in different context. And so I think for me, I've always been wanting to understand, how do you contextualize the world, and numbers and math has always made sense to me. And finance just seemed interesting, because I was like, oh, I can tell a story here through numbers, and like that story, if I like really think about it, can open up a really rich ecosystem that no one wants to talk about. And so I think that has always been the lens, even though I don't think I was as clear about the why back then.
Do you remember the moment where the first idea made sense to you, where you go, oh, some of these things that I'm seeing in the world now have some structure?
Yeah, I think the idea of like impact investing and like the whole world around like social financing and microfinancing and social lending was a huge unlock for me, just because, again, I'd grow up going back to Zimbabwe and like I would see women in village communities, and like I would, what I would always pick up on is it really seems like the women are holding this thing down. The men are going off to the city and driving a taxi. It doesn't really seem like the money's coming home. Like, the women here are the ones who are doing crop sharing, I think is the word. And like, they're the ones who are selling zucchini on the street, and they're the ones who are porting all of the kids together and shuffling them up to school. And so I've always wanted to understand how does that work, and then also how could one do something with that. And so when I first learned about that, I was like a part of this thing with the World Food Prize Foundation, which is like a semi-UN affiliate, and they'd like ship you based off of if you got into this program around the world to do research at a research foundation. And so I went to, I'm going to mess it up, but the International Crops Research Institute of the Semi-Arid Tropics in India, ICRISAT.
Hard to believe that's one that doesn't roll off.
Yeah, exactly. It was in Hyderabad, and I was assigned to the like almost like social impact, like economic part of the research facility, although it is like overall meant for agriculture. They had sliced that out. And they asked me, they were like, I don't think they understood I was 16. They were like, do you want to do independent research or do you want to join a project and just like observe? And I was like precocious. And I was like, who does independent research? And they said, PhD students. And I said, great, I'll do that. So I spent some time in like village communities, Orapalis specifically in India, about 2 weeks doing like field level studies. I was basically studying the impact of both microfinancing and also just the economics of being a woman, specifically as it relates to like post like pregnancy and then like post pregnancy, I'm forgetting the like real words, lactation, and like how does that actually impact some of the like social welfare programs that currently exist, where does money go, etc. How do they deal with nourishment, malnourishment, whatever. And so that was like my first time being like in a different world and in a different continent than I'd ever been to. But what struck me was that I saw very similar things. The themes were the same. The ways that people approached things were very similar to things that I'd seen in Zimbabwe or Kenya or other places in Africa that I've been to. And it almost like zoomed the world in, if that makes sense. Like I think I'd always viewed the world as, because the experience between Zimbabwe and the US is so different, I was like, the world is full of polarity, but then this experience was like, oh, the world is so much closer together. So anyways, I don't know if I even answered that question, but that's my lens.
Yeah. And then you begin a professional career in strategy and in technology, and there continues to be this conversation either internally or externally with people in your immediate vicinity, and then you say, I need a bigger platform for this, and you start writing?
Yeah, I started making the videos on TikTok first and then Instagram, and then I realized that going back to, I think, our through line of this conversation, of this like polarity of frivolity versus what's seen as more intellectual, that like people were following me for the row unboxing, or they were following me for an economic take on what's happening with Prada. And I really wanted these like disparate worlds to live in one ecosystem that like you couldn't escape. So Substack was really appealing to me because you get the newsletter send if you're a subscriber twice a week. I write twice a week, so you get it twice a week, regardless of whether or not you're following me for shopping or if you're following me for consumer analyses. I enjoy that like now it gets to live in one consistent bubble. That's the genesis.
And do you think those are two different audiences? Are those two different readers? Or is there one tribe this is the coolest combination of things that I've ever seen? I would put myself in that category where I read a lot of Substacks, and I like the intellectual stuff, I like the style stuff, but there's nobody who's doing this in the way that you are. And I don't know, that very much resonated with me.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that it's a Venn diagram. I think there are 3 buckets. There are a lot of people that I get the email after the Tuesday send, and it's like, I work in private equity, or I'm like this, and I really appreciated the way that you laid this out. And then I also get the same for the Friday send if I'm a cool stay-at-home mom and like this Kate sweater changed my life. But then I do have a huge overlap of people that live in both and are both. I also think that the like kind of vibe for the Substack that I write specifically, I took a stance to take a very specific tone.
It's called Trademark.
Trademarked, yes.
Sure that we get the appropriate plug in here.
Yes, trademarked.
Subscribe now.
Subscribe twice a week. I took a very strong stance to write in a what I call a zillennial tone, just because I think that a lot of times when, and this is the crux of all the content that I make, a lot of times, specifically the intellectual stuff, like I love academics, but like it is so navel-gazy, and it's so, we're going to use these words and present ideas in this way in order to make it.
The less you understand, the smarter we are.
Yes, there's opacity. And I'm like, I want to just be in conversation with people. And I also want to prove that you can yassify intellectual and intelligent and really complex theory. And not only does it land, it broadens the conversation. And so I'll use a lot of LOLs and TLDRs, and the syntax is like we're texting, or I've now heard from other people who will tell me, give me feedback. They're like, it's like I'm at a dinner party and I'm overhearing the best conversation. And that's all I've ever wanted. So it's unique, niche.
And you have gotten credit for coining a lot of terms of describing cultural moments, explaining, all right, the zeitgeist through, all right, we're puffy this season.
Yeah.
How intentional is that?
So unintentional. I have ADHD. I need everyone to know that. My brain is like a Wordle meets something at, like it's always going and playing Scrabble all day mentally. And I don't know. Growing up, I always made up new words because I'd be like, the ones here are inadequate for the vibe we're picking up on. And I would always get made fun of it. My family would make fun of me. My friends would. And then with puffification, where I basically said, Prada released a puffy silhouette of their most popular SKUs, specifically the slow fur. That was their sellout, blowout. And it was coming at a time of like peak inflation. We were seeing so much global instability as it relates to the inflation crisis. And I was like, this feels like it's deeply interconnected. We're seeing like a consumer response to inflation, and then it's being mirrored in art form. And so it's like the puffification of Prada. And it just blew up and took off. And there was a lot of, to your point, citations. I think Harper's Bazaar wrote a piece called The Puffification of Fashion. It was taught about in Parsons. It was really cool.
And you see these sort of things in the world, and does your mind just immediately go to, obviously the intent here is to comment on the world? Is there, I don't know, I'm fascinated by just how direct that statement is. There are some designers, Prada is obviously one, who were deeply philosophical and deeply political. And then I think there are sometimes just people who are trying to create pretty things.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, I think that's true. And not only true, I think fair. I think not everything needs to be philosophical in its intention, but I think everything is up for grabs in its theorization and in its the unpacking of that thing. So I think whatever you thought was happening is great, but whatever I feel based off of your art form is also valid.
And then the interpretation becomes so important, right? All right, this thing got created, and then the way in which it becomes consumed, the way in which it becomes worn, the way in which it becomes discussed, it becomes at least as important as whatever the original intent is, yeah?
Yeah, no, entirely. I think consumer sentiment and how things resonate that's what consumption is. Like, that's how you drive the economy, is why. And asking that question pointedly. I actually just wrote a piece for Vogue Business on the TikTok Chinese manufacturers going viral, and what does that mean for brands, and specifically what does that mean for consumer sentiment? Because with luxury prices spiking and all of this quote-unquote greedflation, like the Chanel flat bag has doubled in price since 2019. Dior has a bag that's gone up 51% in the same time period. It's crazy. And it's, again, going back to this idea of discernment, like as a consumer, what are we thinking, and are we buying? And if so, why? What is the driver? And I think if you're a brand and you're not thinking about that, then you've lost the sauce majorly.
And where do those ideas come from? Where do people get inspired?
I think, from a brand side or from a consumer side?
From a consumer side, right? I'll just leave it at that. Yes, from a consumer side.
Yeah, I think there are many ways to think about that. And I always go back to this idea that if you're trying to source the origination of inspiration or influence, it's like you're going to the Garden of Eden and trying to pick a fruit. Which one and where and why, and how do you even get back to the Garden of Eden? You can't in 2025. I think from a consumer perspective, you have in-person influence. So your best friend wearing something that's super cute and you're like, that resonates with me. But then you also have to think about the fact that you're friends because you ascribe to the same helix of consumption to an extent, even if it's philosophical or emotional, whatever the landscape may be. And then now we have our phones. And so you enter this algorithmic form of consumption, whether it's written or whether it's through video or photo, etc., Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram, they all have different ways in which a user will engage and a way in which you're subconsciously getting influenced. And so what I see now is that we've moved away from this idea of cores, which I think was very TikTok centric, and moved into this embodiment of like lifestyle. And so when you're walking down the street and you see a girl, you can feel, oh, I know who you follow based off of what you're wearing. But then I also think that there's a blanding of style that's happening because of algorithms. Because when you think about if algorithms exist to surface content based off of what the broadest, what's the word I'm looking for? The broadest engagement has been, what you're going to see is a lot of jeans and white t-shirts because everyone loves jeans and a white tee. And so if everyone's getting fed jeans and white tee and everyone's engaging with that and you go on and everyone's in a jean, it's like this thing where like, where did that come from? Are you inspired by early 2000s Kate Moss?
The
or
enshittification of...
Yeah, it's hard to tell. So I think, but then to answer, I think your question even from a more meta lens, I think, again, it's the emotional pull. And I think a lot of that does have to do with the psychological breakdown of how you view yourself and then how you view those who you're imprinting like this, your collective desire onto. And I think for some people that then becomes super individualism and wanting to be different, but are you wanting to be different just for the sake of it? So I could go all day.
You said earlier that your taste is based on, all right, these are the things that are good. I have a sense of the things that I like based on some, I don't know, objective reality or whatever it is, rather than someone telling me that this is what's in right now. Where do you think that came from?
I think just, again, growing up and not ever being in one single stationary place at all times, like, I lived in I was living an algorithm where, like, you're hopping from North Dakota to Palm Beach. Like, we're talking bedazzled jeans to fuller mez, big, beautiful jewelry. Like, and so I think the vibe for me has always been like, I can't rely on what I'm seeing as the like bellwether of, okay, like this is what everyone's doing, because I have no idea actually what everyone quote unquote is doing. I have to rely on what feels good to me, what makes me feel something. And I've always had this like gut punch when I'm obsessed with something and I have no idea if it's trendy, nor do I care. I'm lucky that actually sometimes it does work out that way, but I always go back to the Elia Latecal bag. I don't know how big you are into that handbag.
That's a reference I don't know.
Okay. Elia has this bag that like, you know, has completely revitalized the brand from an accessories perspective because everyone's so obsessed with it. And I was in store like buying something else and I see this like bright red bag. I'd never seen it before. And I was like, what is that? I need it. And my essay was like, this is like actually really crazy you're saying this because there's only one and this is the craziest find and like it's about to blow up, whatever. And I was like, I literally don't care. I need that bag. So I bought it. And lo and behold, it is my most complimented thing. People froth at the mouth. Every fashion person, it's like the bag I'll bring if I want to make a friend at an event. But it's like one of those things where I had no idea the context of, I also should say, I'm not someone that consumes a lot on the internet. I try to stay as, I hate the word pure, but like I call it like I'm in my own amniotic sac by design. Like I want to exist in my own bubble. And so as it relates to my own consumption, I'm not really trying to see what other people are wearing or what they're doing, because I think that dulls my perspective of what I think I care about, which then I want to bring to other people. And so my TikTok algorithm is DJ mixes and like funny stuff, but I don't see a lot of what's up. So yeah, hopefully that answers.
Was there one of the worlds that you grew up in that resonated more? You drew the dichotomy between the bedazzled jeans and the head-to-toe Birkin.
Yeah.
Did one of those feel right to you? Were there other places you were where you're like, oh yeah, this is it?
Yeah, I would say I've always felt a sense of stillness when I'm like on Worth Avenue in Palm Beach. I think Palm Beach has always been a place that has felt very grounding, which is funny because obviously, but I think it's just like the excess and the I don't give an F about the way that you're like putting it all together is just delicious to me. And then also I would say London. I've always felt, I think, a kind of same, I go by energy, like a calmness, but also I've always been fascinated by what women in London are wearing, or even like growing up, like friends, like my cousin's friends, like my cousin's ex-girlfriend growing up was like canon for me because she was so cool. She was and like she would wear like a low-rise jean and like the way that she would put things together, I was like, wow. And then I'd go back to Kentucky and I'd be like, you guys don't get what Lucy was on. Like, you guys don't understand.
No, they didn't.
No.
And is there a connection between those worlds? If you think about the line about the cerulean sweater from the movie, is there a trickle down, or do these things just exist independently of one another?
I think it depends on what we're trickling down. I think it's really easy to trickle down a vintage Levi. Like a pair of 501s, I'm sure, is everywhere. I think it's harder to trickle down a sparkly Judith Lieber. You know what I mean? I think that the through line that I've always found is that consumption is emotional. And so I have always been curious about the fact that it seems to be driven by the same factors. I hate to say it, but sometimes these things are motivated by what people on the street are going to see, or the promenade, and the bedazzled jean is no different from the Birkin or no different from the like perfect mohair sweater. It just depends on where you are.
I think that's right. And I guess that's my sort of kind of point of investigation here is that are we all just trying to conform to whatever tribe we either are in or aspire to be in?
Yeah, I think to an extent, because even if you are quote unquote so individualistic and everything you wear is vintage and cool and unique, and then I look at your friends and everyone looks vintage, cool, and unique, isn't that a tribe? Isn't that a collective formation of self and identity? For sure. Do people want to talk about that? No. And I get it because it bursts your bubble.
I don't know. I think about some of the ideas that have been the most impactful to me. And there was a book that I read in college by a historian who was at Rutgers at the time named Jackson Lears. Okay. There was a book called No Place of Grace. And the thesis of this book was that ideas come from people seeking authenticity, and I am going to look for the thing that is real and authentic and outside the gales of capitalism. And he talked about arts and crafts furniture, and he talked about denim is one, and chinos are another, that inevitably gets swept up by the market, who then commoditizes it or commodifies it. Is that just the animating spirit of capitalism?
I think that's a trend cycle. I think that the invisible hand will get to work, unfortunately. And I think that some people are raised to consume via influence and other people are raised to consume, to your point, by this like origination and authenticity and the pure individualistic kind of mindset. But unfortunately, those things, again, don't always exist in a silo. That's why you have artist communes, even if everyone's creating different things. And unfortunately, there's just no reality wherein we're not ever going to see people commoditizing that which was made with pure intent. It's just not tenable.
And maybe the point is that there is no such thing as pure intent. And
yeah.
Even that is something that's a fantasy of, I want to be free of all influence. You go,
yeah.
I don't think we have that capacity
for sure.
As humans.
Why'd you make that decision?
If you did, why are you then writing about it? It's a
right.
little bit like, you can go off and live in the woods by yourself.
Love that for you.
Then I don't need to read your poetry.
No, Thoreau.
Totally, right? Like, the idea was not just that you were sitting by the pond, dude. It's telling us that you were by the pond.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. That makes me think about Instagram chefs. Like, you have your friends that like just they cook the most insane stuff and it's all beautiful and presented so well and the ingredients are so interesting. But you're like telling us that you made your own ramp butter because it signals something that you want us to know about you. And that's totally fine, but let's not lie and act there wasn't even if it was subconscious, there was a driver there. And that's okay.
And it does change the world in which we live. And there's been so much written in the travel realm about how restaurants and hotels now are designed around lighting to make sure that your images are going to look good. I don't know. There's obviously lots of judgmental things that you could say about it, but I guess it just is.
Yeah.
The systems create the reality.
Yeah, and then I think the counterpoint to that is all of the places that are now like no photos. And then the whole point of that is to then go back and tell your friends, I couldn't take a picture. I'm so sorry. There's just no photos. And then it's, wait, where were you? And that becomes its own thing. It's ridiculous, but I love it.
Totally. That's playing on that human desire. I want something that is special. So where are we in the world now? The world is chaotic on 100 dimensions.
Yeah.
And where is that manifesting? You wrote an interesting piece, I think, yesterday about where we are in tariffs. And does that relate back to earlier periods of time when we've been in these thralls of chaos? What do you see the world doing today?
Yeah, great question. I think that, first of all, the news is becoming brutal to consume. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way.
This morning, everything's great again.
Woo!
48 hours
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I posted in my trademarked has a thriving group chat on Substack of the most fascinating, brilliant, stylish women. I would say also fascinating is that like it's a place where like a 27-year-old is coalescing with a 60-year-old and like sharing about like the best buccal fat surgeon in New York City. Just like crazy topics. Anyways, I posted, I might have been 2 weeks ago now when there was the 90-day pause and I was like, who bought the dip? And there were so many people being like, I did. And then within 20 minutes, someone was like, just kidding. Actually, like things are bad again.
You have lots more
There's a
opportunities.
caveat. Exactly. I think overall, I think that we're exhausted by, listen, I know that I'm 28 and like, I also understand maybe I have a myopic lens on the world and what's going on. From a personal, like, lived experience, I can't remember a time that has felt so turbulent for so long. Like, we have had crazy swings in the past 5 years. We've had a pandemic. We've had crises as it relates to, like, women's bodies and women's health. We've had an inflation crisis. We've had this past election, depending on where you fall and how you feel about that. But I think for a lot of us, terrible. And then you also now have like tariffs, and it's like we get maybe 2 months in between each of these things where it's like we've like actually hit a soft landing. Everything's good. No inflation. Employment is up. And then it's actually like this election might ruin your life. Enjoy it though. Be so grateful. And so I think that as a consumer,
you see the sneakers, boy, the accessories are
the
good.
accessories are great. And so I think as a consumer at this point, mentally, you're like, okay, I have both saved and then, well, also you had the pandemic where everyone was cooped up, and then you had summer 2021 where everyone was in Greece, and then that followed inflation where everyone then started saving.
The beginning of all the hot girl summers?
Yeah, it was like hot girl walks, like all of the whole hot girl universes, I think were birthed out of being cooped up at home.
Out of being really cold and
yes,
alone.
that's very lonely with like your little throw blanket, like rocking on your couch.
Know what this is, but it is not hot.
It's not hot. It's certainly very frigid. And so I think that we've experienced such whiplash that at this point you do not understand what up is and what down is relative to a normalized baseline of like calm. And I think about the 2010s, and obviously we had the post Great Recession recovery and we had Brexit. But, like, I just don't think we had, like, crazy swings like we've had recently. So, to answer your question in the longest way possible, which I'm so sorry about, I think consumers at this point are feeling this, like, input of hedonism. Like there's this input, and I have written a lot about monia and hedonism as it relates to whether or not those are true indicators of like how consumers swing based off of periods of the economy, but also like periods of just culture. And I have been writing a lot about since Brat Summer that like this is really, it speaks to hedonism, and Trump being elected speaks to hedonism, and all of these like codes of like individualism as it relates to self over collective, because the collective is so fragmented and disjointed. Who am I to speak to? And so I think even if you're someone who's quote unquote, you're so empathetic and you care about the world, like I think we're also seeing massive wealth imbalances as it relates to this country that are only continuing to become more broad. And so everything is fractured. And so from a consumer perspective, you feel this, you know what, I really just want to buy nice things, and I want to feel happy, and I want to like just do something for myself. It's like big treat yourself culture. Gen Z has this thing called little treat culture where you leave your house and you buy a matcha. But like all of that rolls up into obviously how much money you have to spend. So if your little treat is a Kate sweater versus is your little treat a matcha, but then also levied against this idea of control. So I need to still have my wits about me because I could lose my job. I could have to rely on my savings, but I don't actually know if that's true. And I'm tired of planning for that to be the truth. So there's like this huge duality and this polarity happening.
And you mentioned this briefly, and that I was hoping you were going to address it in one of your things, but is smoking back?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Cigarettes are so back. It's actually alarming. My sister goes to Dartmouth, and I even asked her, because I love to do market research as it relates to like what we see in real life, because I think that's so important. And I like to ask around to different swaths of people. And so I'm like, okay, I live in Chelsea, and every day I see predominantly women smoking. I go uptown, I see women smoking. Downtown, I'm traveling, I'm seeing women smoking. I asked my sister, who's a Gen Z, a true Gen Z, I'm like, are people smoking at school? And she's, yes. And actually, not just when they're going out, the people smoking cigarettes are girls, guys are still vaping. And I'm like, whoa, that's exactly what I'm seeing. And we're in two completely different environments. And I think that some people are trying to make that into some like nostalgia, or smoking is part of the skinny core stuff that's happening, quote unquote Ozempic and whatever. But I think it's, if I'm being honest, pure hedonism. Like it is like the fullest form of, we saw this in the 80s, it's the fullest form of I don't give an F and I want to do what makes me feel good, and also it makes me feel cool. So I'm going to do both, and I don't really care what you have to say. Like I've seen people smoking around babies. That's how I know that things are getting insane. Anyways.
But it's just this sort of thing of, we don't know what is going to happen. We're probably up the creek, so...
Yeah, everything's carcinogenic.
We know this is a terrible idea, and I want to feel something.
Yeah, everything's carcinogenic. Everything is a microplastic. You can't even wear a legging without being concerned about microplastics. So yeah, if you want to smoke a cigarette, now's your time. Because who knows?
Because the inside of your Starbucks cup is probably going to kill you as quickly
everything.
as your
Yes,
Marlboro.
Exactly.
And so is it just exhaustion? Do we just at some point go, I'm just tired of living? Why are we still consuming? Because there is some rush from that?
Yeah, who wants to feel like hopeless and depleted? I don't know. I know that there's like the nihilistic community, but like they're their own faction. Like I think most of us enjoy feeling things, and there is, for some of us,
feeling things is just one thing.
That is true.
We enjoy feeling a multiplicity of things.
A range,
Yeah.
The rainbow of things. I think there's nothing like the rush of consent. I'm sorry, I'm going to sound like an addict, but it's like when you hear that at the register and like you get handed even just like a pack of gum and it's fresh and you open it's just so exciting. I think that there is something so exciting about consuming and about new things, but also old things, and like just the discovery of like pleasure as it relates to pleasure being just for pleasure. And I think for some people that's like by going to a workout class. Like I don't think consumption has to be like a tangible good, but I think that everyone is feeling this desire to do things outside of the ordinary or day to day in order to feel more, because everything has become so polarizing and muted.
As you look at the world of fashion and style, Is it expanding? Are there more voices, or do we just hear the same small number of voices louder and more resonant?
I think it depends on who you are and how dedicated you are to searching for new voices. I think by and large, it's probably shrinking in terms of who people are listening to. But I do think that more than ever, at least as a consumer, I felt like there are so many varied and nuanced perspectives that exist. And that's where I think the whole building your algorithm thing is huge. And I know Vogue Business did a study on this, I think last year. Gen Z is super obsessed with this idea of curating their algorithm, whereas older generations don't think to do that. And so I think when your algorithm becomes a part of your identity and you're like, if I share this video to someone, they're going to know my FYP and they're going to know what I think about it. It's serious. And so at that point, if you do care about being someone who cares about interesting things, then it becomes like the Spotify, where it's going to be seen with the coolest, most esoteric indie playlist, because it will tell people that I'm smart and interesting. Whether that's true, I don't know. But
what things have you found recently that you've been excited about?
Consuming?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I think, oh gosh. Okay, so Vanessa Hernandez, her jewelry is, I think, the light of my life. I am obsessed with her. I discovered her at the To Beers event in the fall, where she was speaking on a panel, and I took this photo of her rings like candy, and I'm pretty sure I've never had a story go viral, but like that story was seen around the world. Like, I can't even begin to describe how incredible it is that like she basically takes the sensuality of like womanhood and like curvature of womanhood and turns it into something that's tangible. And I've seen a lot of people do what she does, but like she doesn't use a mold. Her like history is like super, she's trained with all the best people, and I think it just shows, and you can feel the emotion behind it. And I like want everything. I can't wait one day for me to afford everything, because I will. I'll buy it all.
What else?
I would say Carolina Bucci, which I know isn't like new, but for I think Gen Z and Zillennials, like we didn't have the true Carolina Bucci phase that everyone else did with the Lucky Bracelets, like Indie Sleaze Core. I have one on right now. I think that there's nothing more special than putting silk and threads of gold together and then making it cheeky. It's so hedonistic, and I just think it's so special, and every time I wear it, it's another thing that I get endless compliments on in the fashion community, which makes you feel great. So I would say that. And then the last thing, I like thought a lot about this, and now, oh yes, Susie Condi. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
No.
She's a fashion designer. She makes these like cashmere sweaters that are made with the thickest spool of cashmere, and it feels like a cloud, but then it also looks like your grandmother knit it for you, and it envelops you into this like haze of, I would almost call it like cinnamon and warm milk, like you're at your Nana's house. It is so special and magical, and if you're ever sad, you just need a Susie Condi sweater.
That's one of the best sales pitches of all time.
It's true.
So you told us about the bracelet. What other jewelry are you wearing today?
Oh my gosh. I have on my, it's not even, I don't even think it's dialed correctly, but my Panther that I got a nice gift from my parents after college, and then the Carolina Bucci Lucky Bracelet. I think this one is called Passion. And then I actually talked about this in my Instagram stories. I have this Justin Clou, the like small mini like rose gold one, and I think I wore it for a year and then genuinely forgot I had it because I got the ick from it. And then recently I've been like, I really want...
Before you continue,
yeah.
Why did you get the ick from it?
And this is going to expose me, but like I was seeing too much of it on the street in ways that were not aligning with my personal style. And I was like, am I here? Is this where I am? No. So I had dropped that, and I also just stopped stacking. Like I really only was wearing my watch because I wanted to be Audrey Hepburn, but I think, or Lee Radziwill. But anyways, one of my friends wears hers backwards like this, so it looks like a bangle. And I've been looking for a bangle, and then I was like, I should consume less. I have a bangle. I can just hide the little screw. So now I wear it all the time, and it's great. And then I have this like star bracelet from, I think, Charm Factory, and it's like gold and like substantial and cute. So that's what I've been rocking with lately.
Love it.
Yeah.
How would you describe your style?
That's a really great question, and one that I never answer. I think it is part of the world. I think some people call that eclectic or boheme. I don't love those words. Just think it's like globally inspired. But then also I'd say a little bit classic, and also a little bit like a little trendy. Like I think that I love things that are silly and zany, and I love to, like, I'm wearing these sneakers right now I call them Rugrat sneakers. They're from Dries Van Noten, and they look like Rugrats. And so I think for me, it's a combination of things that, again, on the surface, it might look like put together or classic, but if you like zoom in, it's crazy. That's my energy.
Love it. What's the last thing that you've read that inspired you?
Oh my, that's a great question. What was it? Okay, I have been obsessed with this. It's actually a textbook. I'm still currently working my way through it. I'm going to mess it up, but it's on American houses. It's like an architecture book. And what I love about this book is it basically breaks down the craft house or Georgian and down to the beam, or like why one decision was made from Pan-Hellenic Greek architecture to now. And I think it's so interesting because it also tells me a lot about the construction of American neighborhoods, and also tells me a lot about the construction of like why people made certain decisions or what they were trying to achieve, but then also will sometimes bring me back into discovering what it meant to be in the Renaissance area and period, and what the Medicis were thinking. And so I love it because it like is, I hate to say this, so ADHD core, this book. Like it really feeds all of my interests in a very niche and specialized way. Not the way that it was intended, but I've been powering my way through. It's thick, but I love it.
What a cool thing. Do you feel like you need all of these different things? You need the strategy and the tech and the writing? Do you need all of those things to keep in balance, or would you like to be able to do one more than the other?
Yeah, no, I definitely think I'd love to be full-time, like doing the Substack and the writing and creating content. But then I also angel invest and do other things as well and advise. And so I think for me, I see it as like the apparatus of how I think is always going to be like catered towards what I care about. And so if I'm doing one thing, it'll never actually just be one thing. So I'm not super concerned
that there's going to be a dearth of opportunities for enrichment.
Yes, exactly. And I will find them.
Are there interesting companies that you're seeing as you're looking at the landscape of emerging tech or emerging consumer products?
Oh, that's another really great question. And I hate to say this because I did invest in them, but Locker.
It's always a good idea to talk your book.
Locker is, I would almost call them the Pinterest of shopping. What they have basically done is you have this like almost social network wherein you're able to save all of the things that you want. So like I always have 500 tabs open at once, and I can put everything that I want into real buckets, but then I can also think about my wardrobe and what I already own, and then I can also share it along, like I can see what my friends are shopping and I can see what everyone's up to. And I think it's like a really interesting way of thinking about like how one does the personalization of shopping. Because, and this is like my larger thesis of what fascinates me, like Daydream is another emerging startup that they did just have a whopper round of funding, but like they're fascinating because they're basically becoming the Google of shopping. So if you want black t-shirt, like they're going to be using Gen AI to basically take your taste and give you what you want, which is what I spend all my time doing. So I'm very excited for that. But I think that the internet generally, my thesis is that it has this leaky attribution problem if no one's actually fixed the like pipeline to understanding like how consumers consume and how to monetize each of those points in a way that's connected and has like real attributable like data and like insights in a clean and hygienic way. And so I always say whoever fixes leaky attribution on the internet will be the next Zuckerberg, and I want in. So I keep my eyes to the ground on the shopping tech.
It seems like a solvable problem, and yet it is not.
No, it's impossible.
And so maybe there's something instructive there.
Yeah, I think ShopMy is also great. Like they're doing an incredible job, but it's like everyone right now is like a product. I would say Daydream is probably the Daydream, and I will say Locker, I think are like strong and make a ton of sense. Okay, fine, I'll say ShopMy too, but it's like I just feel like there will be a world wherein like all of these things get rolled up into one massive thing, and I don't know what that thing will be, but I'm excited because I think right now the disaggregation is causing a lot of leakiness as it relates to how consumers consume and how they feel about consumption, specifically on the internet. So fixing that will be huge.
And as a brand and as a marketer, it makes it much more challenging to know. We still, 100 years on, live in a world where I don't know which 50% of my advertising is working, which is really amazing.
It's crazy. That's crazy. Have you guys ever tried the Above? This is crazy, but I just heard about the underworld ecosystem of the Above taxi screens.
I know of the taxi screens. I don't know about the underworld of the Above taxi screens.
I was curious if you had a point of view on the brand side, because like basically localization of marketing and whatever, but I had no idea that like it was it's like a super lucrative like economy of both from the supplier side, but then also from the distribution, and then as a consumer, like it does make sense as it relates to the awareness layer of the funnel. So anyways, I was just curious if but like I'm always thinking about that stuff. It's interesting.
There's lots of places, there's lots of attention, and what of that is the most impactful to who?
Yeah, no one has that data.
Question.
No one has that data.
Yeah.
One day someone will.
There you go. There's an opportunity for you. If people want to find you, where do they find you on the many internets?
Oh man, I would say if you want the full vibe, go to Substack, go to Trademarked. If you want like all of my like thoughts with a photo, go to my Instagram, specifically for my stories. TikTok will be the most rogue, but that's great too. I'm Tariro Makoni, like first last name on TikTok, Tariro.Makoni on Instagram. And then you can also send me an email if you want to do something together. That's tariromakoni.social@gmail.com.
There we go.
Yeah.
Tariro, what a joy.
Woo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. This was so fun.
That was Tariro Makoni. Brilliant, bold, and endlessly insightful. If you're not already subscribing to her Substack Trademarked, go do that immediately. Her lens on consumption, culture, and style is as sharp as it is unexpected. In a world that often divides intellect from indulgence, Tariro reminds us that taste, economics, and emotion are always intertwined. Thanks for listening to The Materialist. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The Materialist is a production of At Present, matchmaker to extraordinary jewelry.